So let's clone kitty mail, code, copy, and I will clone it. Close. Get from version control. 32. So let's see what it does. After it's cloning, I want to run it so you know what to expect. And this way we will know what to look for in the code. So this code exists in several variants, and I want to start with variant called simplest. So if you don't want to deal with fancy stuff in your assignment, maybe going with variants similar to the simplest, it's best choice. And after this, you make it more and more fancy after it works, right? So you do this typically when you do assignments, try to use the simplest approach. And if it is works, you can always fancify it, right? Make it more fancy. But first, don't forget to commit, or create branches, so you can always go back to something that works if you accidentally break it. So I am checking out simplest checkout. So now we have simplest choice, and I run it, and let's see what it does. I'm going to localhost 8080, input, cat message, pour, meow, his, and since it's mail, not message, it's registered mail or not registered mail. So let's select his not registered, send, we receive it, his not registered, this is it. So not very fancy, doesn't have any business logic besides just passing data between input and output. Unlike a paper or scissors where we do have business logic in between, obviously, right? So let's look at this as an introduction to the second example, which is paper or scissors. I'm assuming that you're familiar with what happened in the previous lesson, because this example is picking up logic from previous lesson. But I will quickly remind what happens here. So let's open the code. In my code, I have an object that contains the data received on the server side. So that will contain the data received from the server side, and this object will be used to display the data. So this object in domain, it's called envelope. For simplicity, message is stored as number, and it's also received as number. In this case, I'm assuming that pour is 0, meow is 1, and his is 2. Default value for envelope is meow. Okay. And it is not registered by default. All right? But it is not registered in object by default, but it is registered on the screen by default, right? It is different because it's kind of independent at this moment. This object is not used to display stuff on the screen, but in future version of the same code in different branch, content of the object will be used to display default selections. In this case, it's independent. It's not used to display default selections. So let's open input page and see what is inside of input. Resources, templates, input page. In the input page, I hard-coded that meow is checked. And it is indeed hard-coded. It's part of the template, not replaced by anything. Meow is checked. And registered is checked. Why do I do it? I'm showing how to hard-code selected item. The same as in my example for paper or scissors, rock is selected by default and it's not randomly selected. user has option to change ROC to something else, but when you go to first page, it's always selected by default. So how it is done? This way. Check it next to ROC, and this is check it next to registered. Okay. Now, when we send data, this form is sending data using get method. So what we have, data is shown as inside of address line. Message is 1, registered is on. Why message is 1? Because I had meow is selected and value is 1. So what did we learn? What we see on the screen, this is poor meow and his, they are just labels on the screen and they are not traveling anywhere. But values that you see here, see value 0, 1, and 2, values actually sent to the server side. So you see it here, and you will receive it inside of the object that is waiting in the controller to receive the data. So in my controller, the address mapped to receiving data is process. So opening controller, I see this is part that receives the data. Method that receives data is process, and I am receiving this as an object. Market model attribute. Why can I do it? I can do it only if input name that I want to receive inside of the object is matching property of the object. Okay, so we learned it in the previous lesson. If input name that I want to receive inside of the object is matching property of the object, system will call setter of the object and insert it. So this is how it works. So input names, message, registered. Properties of the object, message, registered. But this is technically, it's not property, it is private variable. Properties are abstract concept related to setters and getters. But if they match it by naming convention, it is property name. Okay? So this is how data from inputs end up inside of the object. So I'm going to controller. It is inside of the object. I am displaying this as debug. Here's the envelope message 1 registered true. Okay, it's coming from here. And I'm going to output template. This is data, name of the data that I'm about to display, and this is data. Name of the data inside of the template. So template in this program is more interesting than other templates because I want to show extra information about templates. And in this case, it's slightly unnecessarily complicated. So let's learn it. Output. So first, envelope message, but I'm using switch. So because I want to convert 0, 1, 2 into actual word. Like his, meow, whatever. How switch works? You mark some tag, outside tag with th switch and value. Inside you will have some other tags, but only one of them will be displayed, and it will be the one where case is matching value. Okay? Where case 0 matching that, 1 matching that, or this is matching this. Star means anything. It's none of the above, it's like default. Okay? Why do I have this command? In the previous lessons, we learned about specific command that is hiding lines from template processor. They inserted inside of template for appearance when you debug appearance in the browser. They should not be shown to template processor. In this case, it's vice versa. Definitely these cases, case 1 and case all should be visible to template processor, right? Because template processor is doing switch logic. But when you display it in a browser, you maybe don't want to see all three cases next to each other, because it's not actual appearance that you would expect, right? So we learned about using switch, and we learned about command that is hiding data, hiding line stuff from browser in HTML, if we open template as HTML. But it's not hidden from template processor. So it is used in template processing. Questions? Additional thing, when I display registered or not registered, I need to convert true false into words, right? I could use switch, but if you have only two cases, switch is may or may not be necessary. You can also use if besides switch. In this case, it is I decided to use ternary operator question mark. How it works? TH text is always replacing text content of the tag. In this case, text content of the tag, it is this one, P. Right? P tag, it is this. So if it is true, ternary operator says use first one. So when it is registered, it would be registered. Replace with word registered. If it is false, it will pick this one, not registered, and replace this with not registered. Okay? So this, I use a ternary operator to convert true false into words. You can also use if. If will display if something is true. So in this case, you will have if display if it's true, and unless display when it is false. So there are also tags at if that will be displaying content if condition is true, and unless displaying content if condition is false. Today we will see if and unless is opposite to that. So this is a logic about displaying data the simplest way. But what is wrong with it? Remembering that 0 is poor, 1 is null, blah, 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 is complicated if you have a lot of choices. We need to do something better. We learned that in the previous lessons, courses, you probably learned that the best choice for this case it is to use enumeration type. This way we define some constants called enumerator, his, meow, blah, 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 that means some numbers, and at the same time it means strings. It's easy to recognize to us when we see it. So I'm switching to using enum. Here it is. In this case, I defined enumeration type cat message, which is 3 constants. And it looks similar to Kotlin, but in Kotlin and Java, enumeration type is more complicated than just list of constants. In both languages, we can define methods, constructors, override existing default methods of enumeration type. So we just use it the most simplest approach of enumeration type as a set of constants. But there are more to it. We can define stuff. We can include additional values into those predefined values. We can go fancy with it. I'm just using this in the simplest possible way. Next, in my envelope, I define it message in now cat message, so I cannot assign it one. I'm referring to actual value from enumeration type cat message meow. And then register it is still false. Okay. Next, in my KTML controller, I still receive envelope, but I validate it. Why? In the previously, it is extra step in complexity, but making code more robust. In the previous version, I decided not to validate, but if data is not 0, 1, 2, but something else like a string, it won't be parsable and it would be error, say bad request error. In this case, I can avoid bad request error if for some reason data is not parsable, and we can artificially simulate the situation when it's not parsable. We can type wrong data in address line. Okay. And in this case, it's a demo. It's not something that we may expect. So it's a demo. So it is validated. What is an input page now is more interesting. When I display input page, I insert default envelope. I call constructor, default constructor of the envelope, and I bind it to the page, to the input form. So when we go to input form, we will see that object envelope that I passed it to the form is bound to the form. You saw this situation already in the previous lesson. When we wanted to display previously entered data by user in the form. Remember, when user enters data into the form but something is wrong, controller sends user back to the input page and it preserves data inside of the preserves previously entered data. How it was achieved? It was achieved by binding the object, previously object with the data to the form. So data previously entered data in the object is matched to the form. So if user typed Jane in the first name, going back to the page, Jane will end up in user input, inside of user input box. Remember that, right? When we type it partially wrong data, it sends us back to input, and it was partially filled with previous inputs, right? Right? The same logic is here. Envelope is bound to the form. I don't have selected anything by default here and here. But now system is picking data from the object to make selection on the screen. Now it is really cool. See? I'm repeating. This object has defaults null and false. Inside of input forms, this object is bound to the form. So system makes selection null and false based on the content of the object. And now I didn't hard code check it and check it, or check it and check it. Now it is indeed matching content of the object. So let's do the demo. Stop it, run it. I'm going to localhost 8080. Remember that my object envelope contains meow false by default. I ended up with meow false. Right? And inside of input, you see it's not selected. But data inside of envelope object matched to the form. Now let's do the demo. I'm going to my cat message and I change envelope and I change meow to his, for example, and I change false to true. So now, if I show input form, I will get his selected and registered selected. So not this, but it will be his and registered. So let's stop it, run it, and go to the form and see. Okay. So I'm going to localhost 8080, his registered. So if we bind object with some defaults to the form, form will make selection based on the content of the object. Where this selection is done? It is done by a template processor. Template processor is doing the job, but browser will receive pure HTML. So, a view page source. You see that it is pure HTML, and in this pure HTML, template processor inserted check it next to his. And template processor inserted check it next to registered, and it's also inserted some extra hidden input to make it easier for Spring Boot to receive the data. So it's easier to resolve logic inside when data is received. So these kind of selections, based on the content of the object bound to the form, is done by template processor. Browser will just receive hard-coded check it HTML inside of HTML. Questions? So that was for input form, how we can select defaults based on content of the object that we bind to the form. And this is far better than just trying to guess what is what's supposed to be checked, not checked. Okay. And why it is better? Because it's easier to make mistake. In the simplest version, what I call simplest, I was lucky because I was lucky. I had to think that in order to get consistent logic, my checkbox, default value must be false. If it is true, logic will be broken. So let me do demo. I'm going back to my simplest case, checkout. Okay, smart checkout. Oh no, smart. Okay, didn't want smart checkout. Skip. So register it false and input. So it is default one. Okay. Why it is complicated? It seems like, why would we worry about it? We should. Because from the beginning of web, it was, in my opinion, it was wrong decisions. Now we have to deal with it. What kind of decisions was made? If checkbox is not selected, it is not sending false. It's not sending anything. The same about radio buttons. If no radio buttons are selected, they're not sending false or whatever, they're not sending anything. So on the server side, you have to deal with such inconsistency. So if you do not select checkbox, it means it has to be, default has to be false, because you don't receive data. So let's do demo. I remove check it. Oh, I can do remove check it by just unchecking, right? So I'm running this again. It is simplest without binding object to the form. So it is the simplest without binding object to the form. So I'm going back to my localhost 8080. Here it is. Uncheck it, register it, and this is checked. Set. Radio button data is received, but no data about checkbox. It is not registered only because my default value is not registered to make it consistent. Okay. So I had to put it not registered by default to match the situation that checkbox is not sending anything when it is not selected. Otherwise, it will be broken logic. Okay? So this is why it's making more complicated. So advice is to bind object to the form. Otherwise, it's getting uncomfortable. So the same issue about radio button. if nothing is selected, for radio button it could be, you can hard code some radio button after this, it's forcing something to select. But if nothing is selected like this, so let's see what happens. I'm restarting. I'm restarting. Okay, localhost. Nothing is selected, right? Okay. Let's uncheck this one as well. Send. Meow not registered. It's because I got default values inside of the object, meow not registered. But you see, it didn't send any data at all. So the same issue about radio button. If you don't select any radio button, it just doesn't send data. Okay. So this is not feature or misfeature of Spring Boot. This is how web works. Radio buttons and checkboxes do not send any data at all unless unless checkbox is checked or some radio button is selected. So we need to always be aware of it. And binding object to the form as default makes it simpler, because this way default from the object will become default in the form. So that was going back to simplest case, and now I will stop it and I will go back to enumeration type to discuss something else using enum checkout. Now let's talk about what is going on again. Run it, and now we will see, we will check inputs in this line. It started. I'm going to localhost 8080 and system pre-selected, template engine processor pre-selected items to match default values in the form, in the object, bound to the form. When we select something and send, we will see that data shows in address line because we are using default. We are using a default way to send it. It's using get. We can notice that there is one more value besides these two, named underscore registered. And this value is hidden input inserted by template engine, and it is this one, to make internal logic easier when system is matching inputs to the object filled by the input data. So this is inserted automatically by template engine. So let's look at values sent by the form. Our message is a enumeration type, but it sends it as a string. Why it sends this as a string? It sends this as a string because I specified it as a string. You see? Value is actually string. This is why it's sending this string. But system is matching enumeration type inside of envelope to string here. So it understands that string in capitals is the match to enumerator. Okay. So this is, and also if we call to string method of enumerator, it will end up in capitals. After it is received, this string will be converted by the system automatically to enumeration type by built-in converter. So what if it is wrong case? What if it is typed as like meow, capital M that? Okay, let's seems like it did work, right? Enter. It seems like it did work, right? Good. What?
I think you're autofill. You type it, click enter.
Uh-huh.
I think Google's autofill.
It is fill it from the bottom, right? This is why it did work, but it shouldn't, right? It shouldn't. It shouldn't work. So this is why I'm surprised why it's why it works. Okay, so let's send it and let's select POR. Okay, and now I want to select it to wrong case. Okay, it didn't work. It displays error message and it's wrong type, right? It says wrong message data type. First of all, where does this message come from? A message is coming from messages, but this program, this envelope object doesn't have any constraints. But we can still specify error message by type mismatch. In this case, it was indeed type mismatch, right? Because I sent something that is mismatching the type what is expected. It expects capitals, so it can be converted into enumeration type. If I send 1, it will be also type mismatch. Where these error messages are displayed? They are here, similarly to how we displayed error messages in the previous lesson, right? We have if that displays input errors, and that will be only if it has errors. And after this, we have loop through errors. If we have two type mismatching, like message is, okay, going back. So for this, his is 1, and for register it is also, no, 45. Okay, totally a mismatch. It will be 2. Okay. Now, why did it convert capital meow into an enumeration type? Because it did have some built-in conversion. Why could it convert 1 as a string to 1 as a number? Because it has built-in conversion. Okay. Can we customize conversion? Yes. So we can customize conversion if we really want to. We can convert string if we provide converter from a string to any object that we like. We can register this and it will be used by default. So this example has also branch with a customized converter. Use it converter checkout. That shows us that we can customize conversion. In this case, a created converter that converts a string, receive it as input, to cat message type. What does it do? It is just making input not case sensitive. It is picking the data that is received as a string and I'm converting this to uppercase. And after this I'm scanning it, value of it is scanner of enumerator type that will provide enumeration type. So this particular conversion is just making input of enumerator case not sensitive. Okay. But this is just declaration of the class, and this class is not known to the system unless you register this in the system. So today we will also learn about configuration. You can change default behavior by registering item into the system. So in this case, I'm registering converter into the system, so it will use it by default. So I created webconfig class. Name is not important, but it must implement web configurer, and it must be marked as configuration. In this class, I'm registering object derived from my class that is converter, is string to cat message converter. So now it can convert strings that are not case correct, that are not correct in case, into enumeration type. So let's see how it works. So I stop it and I run it. And now let's going back to localhost 8080, and in this case, let's try to send his wrong case. It says received, right? It didn't break. So it was example of customizing conversion. In this case, just to make it not case sensitive as a demo, but it can be any kind of conversion from any string to something, some custom type. So let's consider this as a demo. And this was end of the example.